Last Christmas, my daughter-in-law said those exact words to me at our family dinner table. "We don't need your opinion anymore, Iona." I thought she was just being defensive. I thought it was stress from the holidays, so I stayed quiet. But when I walked into the kitchen and heard her whispering to my son about getting rid of the old woman and how much my house was worth, I realized this wasn't about opinions. This was about my life, my legacy, and everything I'd worked 73 years to build. I genuinely felt my heart break while sharing this story with you. If it touches your heart too, please give this video a like and subscribe for more real-life stories like this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Christmas lights twinkled on the oak tree in my front yard as I finished arranging the last of the poinsettias around the mantel. My house in Millbrook had never looked more beautiful. Red velvet ribbons cascaded down the staircase banister, and the smell of cinnamon and pine filled every corner. At 73, I still insisted on doing everything myself. Call it pride, call it stubbornness, but this house had been my sanctuary for 45 years, and Christmas was always my masterpiece. My name is Iona Fleming, though most people call me Io. I'd lived in this sprawling Victorian home since my late husband Marcus and I bought it back in 1979. We'd raised our son Trevor here, watched him take his first steps on these hardwood floors, celebrated every milestone beneath these high ceilings. After Marcus passed 8 years ago, the house felt too big sometimes, too quiet. But during the holidays, it came alive again. This Christmas was supposed to be special. Trevor was bringing his wife Amanda and their twin boys, 8-year-old Jake and Mason, for a full week. It would be the longest they'd stayed since the wedding 3 years ago. I'd been planning for months, buying gifts, preparing menus, even having the guest rooms repainted. I wanted everything perfect for my grandson's first extended Christmas at Grandma Io's house. The doorbell chimed just as I was adjusting the angel on top of the tree. My heart lifted. They were early, which meant more time together. I smoothed my red cashmere sweater and hurried to the door, my heels clicking against the marble foyer. When I opened it, Trevor stood there with 2 suitcases, his brown hair disheveled from the drive. Behind him, Amanda held the boys' hands, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe ponytail she always wore. "Mom!" Trevor's smile was genuine as he dropped the bags and wrapped me in a hug. He smelled like his father's cologne, something I'd noticed he started wearing after Marcus died. "The house looks incredible." "Grandma Io." Jake and Mason broke free from their mother and rushed toward me. I knelt down, my knees protesting slightly, and gathered them both in my arms. Their energy was infectious, their faces bright with excitement. "Look at how tall you've grown," I exclaimed, ruffling their identical dark hair. "I think you might be taller than the Christmas tree soon." Amanda approached more slowly, her smile polite but distant. "Hello, Iona, thank you for having us." "Of course, dear," I said, standing and leaning in for what I hoped would be a warm embrace. Instead, Amanda offered a brief, almost clinical hug. Her perfume was sharp, expensive, nothing like the warm vanilla and lavender scents I preferred. As we moved inside, I watched Amanda's eyes sweep across the living room. She did this every time she visited, this calculating assessment of everything around her. Her gaze lingered on the Waterford crystal collection in the built-in cabinets, the Persian rugs Marcus and I had collected during our travels, the oil paintings we'd bought from local artists over the years. It wasn't appreciation in her eyes. It was appraisal. "Boys, why don't you take your bags upstairs?" I suggested. "I've prepared the blue room for you, with twin beds and a surprise." They thundered up the stairs, their voices echoing through the Iowa house. Trevor watched them go with the kind of tired smile I recognized from my own parenting days. "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "That sounds perfect," Trevor said. Amanda nodded without speaking. My kitchen had always been the heart of the house. The granite countertops gleamed under the pendant lights, and the island was already set with Christmas cookies I'd spent yesterday baking. Snickerdoodles, sugar cookies shaped like stars and trees, and Marcus's favorite chocolate crinkles. I had made enough to feed an army. As I prepared the coffee, I listened to Trevor telling me about their drive from Portland, about his work at the accounting firm, about the boys, soccer season. Amanda remained silent, scrolling through her phone. This had become her pattern during visits: minimal engagement, maximum distraction. "The boys are so excited about Christmas morning," I said, pouring coffee into Marcus's favorite mugs. "I might have gone a little overboard with the gifts this year." Trevor chuckled. "You always do, Mom. Remember when I was 12 and you bought me that entire Lego city? You spent 3 days building it," I replied, the memory warming me. "Your father and I had to bring you meals because you wouldn't leave the dining room table." "Those were good times," Trevor said softly, and for a moment, his eyes held that same wonder they'd had when he was young. Amanda finally looked up from her phone. "How much did you spend on gifts this year, Iona?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone clinical, almost accusatory. Well, I don't really keep track," I said honestly. "It's Christmas. It's about making memories. It's about being responsible with money," Amanda replied, her green eyes fixed on mine. "Especially at your age." The coffee cup felt heavy in my hands. "My age?" Trevor shifted uncomfortably. "Amanda, maybe?" "No, Trevor, someone needs to say it." Amanda's voice was gaining strength, the politeness dropping away like a mask. "Iona, you're 73 years old. You live alone in this enormous house. You spend money like you're going to live forever." I set the coffee cup down carefully, my hands beginning to tremble slightly. "I don't understand what you're getting at, dear." "What I'm getting at," Amanda said, standing and crossing her arms, "is that you need to start thinking about the future. Trevor's future. The boys' future. This house alone is worth what, $2 million? $3 million? And you're just sitting on it, spending money on ridiculous Christmas gifts, and maintaining a house that's way too big for one person." The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut. I looked at Trevor, hoping to see some sign of disagreement, some indication that he didn't share his wife's views. Instead, I saw resignation. "Mom," he said quietly, "Amanda has a point. This house is a lot for you to manage alone." My heart began to race. I manage just fine. I've been managing just fine for 8 years. "Have you?" Amanda's voice was sharp now. "When was the last time you had the gutters cleaned? Or the furnace serviced? Trevor told me you called him 3 times last month about problems with the house." "Minor issues?" I protested. "Normal maintenance. Normal maintenance that you can't handle anymore," Amanda pressed. "Face it, Iona. You're getting older. You're going to need care eventually. Expensive care. And meanwhile, you're bleeding money on a house and lifestyle you can't sustain." I felt tears stinging my eyes. This wasn't how Christmas was supposed to start. This wasn't the warm family reunion I'd been dreaming about for months. "I think," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, "that how I choose to live in my own home is my decision." Amanda laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Your decision? Iona, when you can't take care of yourself anymore, who do you think is going to have to deal with everything? Who's going to have to arrange your care, manage your finances, deal with this house?" "Amanda, please," Trevor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, Trevor. We've talked about this. We need to be practical."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Amanda turned back to me, her expression hardening. "Iona, we think you should consider selling the house, moving into a nice senior community. Something manageable." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sell the house? Leave the home Marcus and I had built together, where we'd raised our son, where every room held decades of memories? "This is my home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's a house," Amanda corrected, "and it's going to be a burden on your family if you don't make some smart decisions now." That's when something inside me shifted. The sadness began to transform into something sharper, more dangerous. I looked at this woman, this person I'd welcomed into my family, into my home, and I saw clearly for the first time what she really wanted. "You want me to sell my house," I said slowly, "so that you can inherit the money while I'm still alive to see you spend it." Amanda's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. "I want you to be practical about your future and your family's future." "My family's future," I repeated, tasting the bitter irony of the words. Trevor stood up, running his hands through his hair. "Mom, maybe we should table this conversation for now. It's Christmas Eve." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Let's not table it. Let's talk about it right now." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the garden Marcus and I had planted together. The rose bushes were dormant now, covered with burlap for the winter, but come spring they would bloom again in riots of red and pink and yellow, just like they had for 45 years. "You think I don't understand money?" I said, still looking out the window. "You think because I'm old, I'm foolish. But let me tell you something, Amanda. Your husband grew up in this house. Every Christmas morning, every birthday, every milestone was celebrated here. This house put him through college. This house is the reason he had a stable, loving childhood." I turned back to face them. Trevor was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. Amanda's arms were still crossed, her expression unchanged. "This house isn't just an asset," I continued. "It's a legacy. It's a place where my grandsons can make memories the way their father did. It's a connection to their grandfather, who loved this place as much as I do." "Memories don't pay for nursing homes," Amanda said coldly. The callousness of the statement took my breath away. I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching for some sign of the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to help me plant flowers in the spring, who learned to ride his bike on the circular driveway, who brought his high school friends here because he was proud of his home. "Trevor," I said softly, "is this really how you feel?" He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. Not the cruelty I saw in Amanda's face, but something worse: weakness. Resignation. The look of a man who had stopped fighting for what he believed in. "Mom, I just want what's best for everyone," he said. "What's best for everyone," I repeated. "And what exactly does that look like, son?" Amanda answered before Trevor could speak. "It looks like you making smart financial decisions while you still can. It looks like you moving somewhere appropriate for your age and situation. It looks like you thinking about your family's security instead of clinging to the past." Clinging to the past. The words echoed in my head as I stared at this woman who had somehow convinced my son that loving your home, honoring your memories, wanting to leave something meaningful to your family was a character flaw. "You know what I think?" I said, my voice growing stronger. "I think you've been planning this conversation for a long time. I think you've been waiting for the right moment to push me out of my own home. I think you see dollar signs when you look around this house, and you're tired of waiting for me to die so you can cash in." "That's not," Trevor started. "That's exactly what this is." I cut him off. "Don't insult my intelligence, Trevor. Your wife wants my house, and she's convinced you that it's for my own good." Amanda's mask slipped. Completely then. Her polite pretense evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You're right," she said simply. "I do want this house. I want my children to inherit something real, something valuable. I want them to have opportunities. And yes, I think you're being selfish by sitting on millions of dollars worth of assets while your family struggles." "Struggles?" I looked around the kitchen, taking in Amanda's designer handbag, her expensive jewelry, Trevor's custom-tailored shirt. "You're struggling? Do you know what Trevor makes?" Amanda's voice was rising now. "Do you know what it costs to raise 2 children? To pay for their education, their activities, their future?" "I know what it costs me to raise 1 child," I replied. "And I did it without demanding that my parents sell their home to subsidize my choices." "Your parents didn't have a $3 million house," Amanda shot back. "There it was." The number. She'd already had the house appraised. Trevor must have seen the realization cross my face because he stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. "Mom, it's not like that." "Isn't it?" I asked quietly. "Then tell me, son. Tell me exactly what it is like." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of the boys playing upstairs and the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Trevor spoke, his voice barely audible. "We're not struggling, exactly. But Mom, the boys are going to need college funds. They want to play sports, take music lessons. Amanda's right about the house being a lot for you. And we could use the help. Help! Such a small word for such a large betrayal. So you want me to sell my home, the home where you grew up, the home your father and I built together, so that you can have help with expenses you should be managing on your own." "It's not that simple," Trevor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's exactly that simple," I replied. "You want my inheritance while I'm still alive to give it to you. You want me to liquidate my life so you can have a more comfortable one." Amanda stepped forward, her composure completely gone now. "You act like this house is some kind of shrine, Iona. It's not. It's just a building. A building that's too big for you, too expensive for you to maintain, and too valuable for you to waste." "Waste," I repeated. "Living in my own home is wasting it." "Yes," Amanda said bluntly, "when you could be providing for your family's future instead of clinging to memories." The cruelty of it hit me like a slap. This woman, this person I'd welcomed into my family, had just reduced 45 years of my life to clinging to memories. I walked to the kitchen island and placed my hands flat on the granite surface. Marcus had chosen this stone himself, running his fingers over sample after sample until he found the one with the perfect pattern of gray and silver. I could still see him standing in this exact spot, laughing as he tried to convince me that we needed an island this big. "You're right about one thing," I said finally, my voice calm now. "This house is valuable. Very valuable. And someday, it will be part of an inheritance." Trevor's face brightened slightly. "Mom, I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." "Oh, I'm being very reasonable," I said. "I'm being more reasonable than you could possibly imagine." Something in my tone must have warned Amanda because she narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" I looked at my son, this man I'd given everything to, who was now asking me to give up everything for him. "I mean that you're absolutely right. I should be thinking about inheritance. I should be thinking about who deserves what I've spent my life building." "Good," Amanda said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "The question is," I continued, "do you really want to know what I've decided?" Trevor and Amanda exchanged glances. Something had shifted in the room, and they could feel it, even if they couldn't identify it yet. "Of course we do," Trevor said carefully. I smiled then, for the first time since this conversation began. But it wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't the grandmother smile I'd been wearing when they arrived. It was something else entirely. "Well then," I said, "let me tell you about the phone call I'm going to make first thing Monday morning." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 o'clock, its deep tones echoing through the house. Upstairs, I could hear Jake and Mason laughing about something, their voices bright and innocent. They had no idea that their Christmas was about to become the day their grandmother's world changed forever. Amanda and Trevor were staring at me, waiting for me to continue. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. "Monday morning," I said slowly, savoring each word. "I'm calling my attorney, Harold Winters. You remember Harold, don't you, Trevor? He handled your father's estate." Trevor nodded, but his face had gone pale. "I'm going to ask Harold to make some changes to my will," I continued. "Some significant changes." "What kind of changes?" Amanda's voice was sharp now, all pretense of politeness abandoned. I walked to the kitchen drawer, where I kept important papers, and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were copies of my will, my insurance policies, the deed to the house, financial statements. Documents I'd organized meticulously after Marcus died, when I realized how much I needed to understand about our finances. "The kind of changes," I said, setting the folder on the island, "that reflect my new understanding of what my family really values." Trevor stepped forward. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that you've made it very clear what you think about this house, about my choices, about my life. You think I'm wasting valuable assets. You think I'm being selfish. You think I should liquidate everything and hand it over to you. We never said, Trevor began. You said exactly that. I cut him off. Both of you. Just in prettier words. I opened the folder and pulled out the will. This document currently leaves everything to you, Trevor. The house, the investments, the insurance money, everything. After all, you're my only child. It seemed natural. Amanda's eyes were fixed on the papers in my hands. Seemed? Past tense, I said. Because tonight you've shown me something very important. You've shown me that you don't see me as a person with the right to live my own life in my own home. You see me as an obstacle between you and what you consider rightfully yours. That's not true, Trevor protested, but his voice was weak. Isn't it? I asked. Then tell me, son. If I said right now that I'm planning to live in this house until the day I die, that I'm going to spend every penny I want to spend on maintaining it and enjoying it, that I'm going to use my money for my own happiness instead of your financial security, what would you say? The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. Amanda had no such difficulty. I'd say you're being incredibly selfish, she said. I'd say you're choosing things over people. I'd say you're putting your own comfort ahead of your family's future. There it is, I said softly. The truth. As long as I'm doing what you want with my money and my life, I'm being responsible. The moment I want to make my own choices, I'm being selfish. I walked to the window again, looking out at the garden. The Christmas lights Trevor had helped me string on the oak tree were twinkling against the dark sky. Such a beautiful sight. Such a peaceful evening that had turned into something I never could have imagined. You want to know what's going in the new will? I asked without turning around. Yes, Amanda said immediately. The house goes to a trust, I said. A trust that will maintain it as a historic property. The rest of my estate goes to establish a scholarship fund at the local high school. For students who want to study history or preservation. I turned back to face them and saw exactly what I expected to see. Amanda's face was white with shock and fury. Trevor looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. You can't be serious, Amanda whispered. I'm completely serious, I replied. You see, you were right about one thing. I do need to think about legacy. I need to think about what I want my life to have meant, what I want to leave behind. What about Trevor? Amanda's voice was rising. What about your grandchildren? What about them? I asked. You just spent an hour explaining to me how capable and responsible you all are. How Trevor has a good job. How you're managing your finances. Surely you don't need an inheritance to take care of your family. Trevor finally found his voice. Mom, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I said. You know what I realized tonight? I realized that I've been so afraid of being alone, so grateful for any attention from my family, that I've been accepting behavior I never should have tolerated. What behavior? Trevor asked, though he didn't meet my eyes. The behavior of people who see me as a means to an end instead of a person with value. I said, the behavior of people who think my home is their future nest egg. The behavior of people who believe they're entitled to inherit my life's work without earning it or appreciating it. Amanda slammed her hand on the counter. That house is sitting there doing nothing. You could help your family, your grandchildren, instead of letting it all go to strangers. The house is not sitting there doing nothing, I said, my voice rising to match hers. It's housing me. It's providing me with comfort and beauty and memories. It's being loved and maintained and appreciated. That's not nothing, Amanda. That's everything. It's selfish, she spat. No, I said, and for the first time I felt the full weight of my own anger. Selfish is demanding that your elderly mother-in-law sell her home to fund your lifestyle. Selfish is coming into this house as a guest and telling me how I should live my life. Selfish is looking at 45 years of marriage and family and love and seeing nothing but dollar signs. The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Amanda's rapid breathing. Trevor was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're making a mistake," Amanda said finally, her voice low and dangerous. "Am I?" I asked. "Or am I finally making the right choice?" "Those boys upstairs are your grandchildren," she continued. "Your blood. And you're going to give their inheritance to strangers?" I looked toward the ceiling, where I could still hear Jake and Mason playing. Sweet children who had done nothing wrong, who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this ugliness. "Those boys," I said carefully, "will inherit something much more valuable than money from me." "What?" Amanda's voice was sharp with skepticism. "They'll inherit the knowledge that their grandmother stood up for herself," I said. "They'll inherit the lesson that you don't have to accept being treated poorly, even by family. They'll inherit the understanding that love isn't about what you can get from someone, but about respecting who they are." Trevor finally looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Mom, please, don't do this. We can work this out." "Work what out exactly?" I asked. "Are you going to stop believing that I should sell my house? Are you going to stop seeing my life as an inconvenience to your financial plans? Are you going to start treating me like a person instead of an asset?" He opened his mouth, but no words came, because we both knew the answer. "I thought so," I said softly. Amanda wasn't finished. "This is ridiculous, Iona. You're having some kind of breakdown. Trevor, we need to call someone. Maybe her doctor." The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent sent a fresh wave of anger through me. "My doctor? You think because I'm 73 and I disagree with you, I'm having a breakdown?" "I think you're not thinking rationally," Amanda said. "I think you're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic." "Logic," I repeated. "And I suppose it's logical for me to give up everything I love so that you can have more money?" "It's logical for you to think about your family's future," she insisted. "I am thinking about my family's future," I said. "I'm thinking about what kind of people I want my grandsons to become. Do I want them to grow up believing they're bawans, entitled to inherit wealth they didn't earn? Do I want them to learn that they should pressure elderly relatives to give up their independence? Do I want them to see love as something conditional on financial benefit?" Amanda's face was flushed with anger now. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said, and my voice was calm again. "I'm being clear. Clearer than I've been in years." I walked to the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for them to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, they joined me. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at my life," I said. "I see a woman who worked alongside her husband for 45 years to build something beautiful. Not just this house, but a family, a legacy, a life filled with love and purpose. I see a woman who raised a son she was proud of, who sacrificed and saved and planned so that he could have every opportunity." I looked directly at Trevor. "I see a woman who buried the love of her life 8 years ago and somehow found the strength to keep going, who learned to manage finances she'd never had to handle alone, who maintained this house and these gardens and this life because it meant something to her." Trevor's eyes were filled with tears now, but he didn't speak. "And then," I continued, "I see that same woman being told by her family that none of that matters, that her life, her choices, her happiness are less important than their financial security, that she should give up everything she loves because other people have decided they deserve it more." "Mom," Trevor whispered, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said. "Because tonight, I also saw something else. I saw a daughter-in-law who has spent 3 years appraising my possessions instead of appreciating my hospitality. I saw a son who has been convinced that his mother's independence is a burden instead of something to admire. I saw a family that looks at love and sees dollar signs." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Jake and Mason were coming down, probably looking for dinner or asking about Christmas Eve traditions. "Grandma Eo!" Jake's voice called out as they entered the kitchen. "When are we going to make cookies?" Both boys stopped short when they saw the tension in the room. Mason, always the more sensitive of the twins, stepped closer to his brother. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked, his 8-year-old eyes moving between the adults. I looked at these beautiful children, so innocent and trusting, and my heart broke all over again. Not for the money they wouldn't inherit, but for the family dysfunction they were about to witness. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you boys go back upstairs and play for a little while longer? The adults are just having a conversation." "About what?" Mason asked. Before I could answer, Amanda spoke up. "About Grandma Io's house, honey. About whether she should keep living here all by herself." I felt a flash of anger at her for involving the children, but I kept my voice calm. "About different ways people can live their lives," I corrected gently. Jake frowned. "Are you moving, Grandma Io?" "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "I'm not moving. This is my home." "Good," Mason said with the simple certainty of childhood. "We like coming here. It's the best house ever." Out of the mouths of babes. I looked at Amanda, whose face was tight with frustration. "Boys," Trevor said, his voice strained, "why don't you go upstairs like Grandma asked? We'll call you when it's time for dinner." After they left, the kitchen felt even more tense than before. Amanda was the first to speak. "You see?" she said. "You're confusing them. They don't understand the situation." "They understand perfectly," I replied. "They understand that this is my home, and I love it. They understand that families should support each other, not tear each other down. They understand things that adults seem to forget." Trevor rubbed his forehead. "Mom, what can we do to fix this? How can we move forward?" I studied his face, looking for some sign of the man I'd raised, some indication that he understood what had gone wrong here tonight. "You can start," I said slowly, "by telling me that you respect my right to live in my own home for as long as I choose." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I do respect that, Mom. I just worry about you." "Worry about what, exactly?" "About you being alone. About what happens if you get sick or hurt. About whether you're really happy here by yourself." There was something in his voice now that sounded more like the son I remembered, less like the man who'd been pressuring me to sell my house. "I am happy here," I said. "Not every day, not every moment. I miss your father terribly. But this house connects me to him, to our life together, to you growing up. It's not just where I live, Trevor. It's who I am." Amanda made a sound of frustration. "Houses don't make you who you are, Iona. People do." "You're wrong," I said simply. "This house is filled with people. Every room holds memories of your father, of Trevor as a child, of holidays and birthdays, and ordinary Tuesday nights that meant everything to me. When I wake up in the morning and walk into the kitchen, I remember making breakfast for Trevor before school. When I work in the garden, I feel Marcus beside me. When I sit in the living room at night, I can hear the echo of all the laughter that's filled this house." I looked around the kitchen, at the place where I'd fed my family for decades, where I'd celebrated good news and comforted sorrows. "You want to know why I won't sell this house?" I continued. "It's not because I'm stubborn or selfish or clinging to the past. It's because this house is my past, present, and future all at once. It's the story of my life, and I'm not done writing it yet." Trevor was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I didn't think about it that way." "No," I said gently. "You didn't. Because you've been listening to someone who sees this house as an investment instead of a home." Amanda's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly. "Fine. Keep your house. Keep your memories. Keep your stubborn independence. But don't expect us to support you when you can't take care of yourself anymore." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Trevor's eyes widened. "Amanda, you don't mean that." "I absolutely mean it," she said, her voice cold and final. "If Iona wants to choose her house over her family, that's her decision. But choices have consequences." I looked at this woman who had just threatened to abandon me in my old age because I wouldn't sell my home to benefit her family, and I felt something settle into place inside me. a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "Choices do have consequences. And you've both made yours very clear tonight." "What do you mean?" Trevor asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid to know. I stood up and walked to the folder of documents I'd left on the counter. "I mean that I'm not waiting until Monday to call Harold. I'm calling him right now." "Mom, it's Christmas Eve," Trevor protested. "He won't be working." "Harold's been my attorney for 20 years, I said, pulling out my phone. "He'll take my call." I dialed the number I knew by heart and waited while it rang. Amanda and Trevor watched me with growing alarm. "Harold, it's I.O. Fleming. I'm sorry to call you on Christmas Eve, but I need to make some urgent changes to my will." "Yes, I understand it's unusual, but this can't wait. Can you come over tonight? I know it's a lot to ask, but this is important. Thank you. I'll see you in an hour." I hung up and looked at my son and daughter-in-law. "Harold will be here at 8 o'clock to witness the changes to my will." "What changes?" Trevor's voice was barely a whisper. "The changes I told you about," I said. "The house goes to the Historical Society. The money goes to establish scholarships. You and Amanda and the boys get nothing." The word, nothing, seemed to echo in the silent kitchen. Amanda's face had gone white, and Trevor looked like he might be sick. "Mom, you can't be serious," Trevor said. "We can work this out. We can talk about this." "We did talk about it," I replied. "For over an hour. And what I learned is that my family sees me as an obstacle to their financial security, rather than a person deserving of love and respect." The conviction he was trying to project. We both knew it was true, and the knowledge sat between us like a chasm that couldn't be bridged with words. Amanda found her voice first. "This is insane, Iona. You're destroying your family over a house." "No," I said firmly. "You destroyed my family when you decided my house was more important to you than I am." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. "I'm done discussing this. Harold will be here in an hour to make the changes official. You can stay for Christmas if you want, but the decision is final." Trevor stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." He walked out the back door onto the deck, leaving Amanda and me alone in the kitchen. She stared at me for a long moment, her green eyes calculating. "You think you're teaching us a lesson?" she said finally. "But all you're doing is proving that you care more about controlling people than loving them." The accusation stung because it carried just enough truth to wound. Was I being controlling? Was I using my will as a weapon? I thought about it for a moment, really considered the possibility. "Maybe you're right," I said slowly. "Maybe I am trying to control something. Maybe I'm trying to control whether I'm treated with dignity in my own home. Maybe I'm trying to control whether my life has meaning beyond what I can provide for other people." I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Trevor, who was pacing on the deck with his phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his father-in-law or one of Amanda's brothers, looking for support or advice on how to handle his unreasonable mother. "You know what the saddest part is?" I continued, not turning around. "I would have given you anything. If you had approached me with love, with respect, with genuine concern for my well-being, I would have found ways to help your family. College funds for the boys, help with a down payment on a bigger house, support for whatever dreams you had." I heard Amanda shift behind me. "Would you really?" "Of course I would," I said, facing her again. "I'm not a miser, Amanda. I'm not hoarding wealth out of greed. But I won't be bullied into giving up my life to subsidize yours." For a moment, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe even regret, but it was gone quickly, replaced by the hardened expression I'd become accustomed to. "It's too late for that now," she said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." Trevor came back inside, his face grim. "I called my Uncle Jim. He thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. He's worried about your mental state. Another family member who thought my desire to maintain my independence was evidence of mental instability." I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. "Did you tell Uncle Jim that you and your wife spent the evening pressuring me to sell my house so you could inherit the money while I'm still alive?" I asked. Trevor's face flushed. "It wasn't like that." "Then how was it exactly?" He couldn't answer because we both knew it was exactly like that. Whatever spin he'd put on the story for his uncle, the basic facts remained unchanged. The doorbell rang, and I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Harold was early, which meant this conversation was about to become official. There would be no going back after tonight. "That's my attorney," I said, walking toward the front door. "Mom, please," Trevor called after me. "Don't do this. We're family." I paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. "Yes, we are. And that's what makes this so heartbreaking." Harold Winters stood on my front porch looking concerned. He was 78, 3 years older than Marcus had been when he died, but still sharp as a tack. He'd handled our legal affairs for 2 decades, from house purchases to business contracts to Marcus's estate planning. "I-oh," he said, giving me a gentle hug. "Are you sure about this?" Changes made in emotional states sometimes lead to regrets later. "I'm sure, Harold," I said, leading him into the living room. "More sure than I've been about anything in years." Trevor and Amanda followed us, both looking like they were walking to an execution. In a way, I suppose they were. Harold set his briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Before we begin, I need to ask some questions, just to make sure this is what you really want. Of course. Are you under any pressure to make these changes? Has anyone threatened you or coerced you in any way?" I glanced at Amanda, remembering her threat about not supporting me in my old age. "No physical threats or coercion, no." "Are you making these changes because you're angry about something specific, or because you've had a genuine change of heart about your estate planning?" I considered the question carefully. "Both, I suppose. I'm angry about how I've been treated tonight. But more than that, I've realized that my current will doesn't reflect my values or my wishes for how my legacy should be used." Harold nodded and made notes. "Can you tell me specifically what changes you want to make?" I outlined everything I'd told Trevor and Amanda. The house to the historical society, the remaining assets to establish educational scholarships, nothing to my immediate family. "This is a significant change, I.O., Harold said gently. "Your estate is worth several $1,000,000. Are you certain you want to disinherit your only child and your grandchildren?" Before I could answer, Trevor spoke up. "Harold, can I say something?" Harold looked at me questioningly. I nodded. "My mother is upset because my wife and I suggested she might want to consider downsizing," Trevor said. "We were concerned about her living alone in such a large house. We weren't trying to pressure her or take advantage of her. We were just worried." Harold turned back to me. "Is that accurate?" I thought about how to answer honestly. They were concerned about me living alone, yes, but their solution was for me to sell my house and give them the proceeds. They made it clear that they see my independence as selfishness and my desire to stay in my home as unreasonable. "We never said you were selfish," Amanda interjected. "You said I was being selfish by not thinking about your family's financial future," I corrected. "You said I was choosing things over people. You said I was putting my own comfort ahead of your security." Harold was taking notes throughout this exchange. "I.O., do you feel that your son and daughter-in-law were primarily motivated by concern for your welfare, or by their own financial interests?" It was a fair question, and I took time to consider it honestly. "I think they started with genuine concern," I said finally. "But that concern became entangled with their own desires for financial security. They convinced themselves that what was good for them would also be good for me." "And you disagree?" "I disagree that I should have to sacrifice my happiness and independence to provide them with financial benefits they haven't earned and don't need." Harold nodded and continued writing. After a few more questions, he pulled a pre-drafted will form from his briefcase. "I can prepare a basic revision tonight," he said. "But I'd recommend you take some time to think about this. Maybe we could meet again after the holidays to finalize everything." "No," I said firmly. "I want this done tonight. I want it witnessed and notarized tonight." "Mom, please," Trevor said, his voice breaking. "Just wait. Give us a chance to make this right." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I felt my resolve waver for just a moment. He looked genuinely distressed, genuinely sorry. But then I remembered Amanda's threats, Trevor's weak capitulation to her demands, the way they'd both made me feel like a burden and an obstacle. "How would you make it right, Trevor?" I asked quietly. He opened his mouth several times before speaking. We could. We could apologize. We could promise not to bring up the house thing again. Until the next time you need money, I said. Until the next time Amanda decides I'm being unreasonable. Until the next crisis or opportunity that makes my assets look appealing. That's not fair, he protested. Isn't it? Tell me honestly, son. If I keep this house, if I live here for another 10 or 15 years, if I spend my money on travel and hobbies and home improvements, instead of saving it for your inheritance, will you and Amanda be supportive of those choices? The silence that followed was answer enough. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps I should give you all some privacy to discuss this further. No, I said. I'd like you to stay and prepare the documents. This conversation has shown me everything I need to know. For the next hour, Harold worked on the legal language while I answered questions about charitable organizations and scholarship criteria. Trevor and Amanda sat on the couch in stunned silence, occasionally whispering to each other but not attempting to interrupt the process. When Harold finished, he read the new will aloud. My house and gardens would be preserved as a historical property, managed by the local historical society. My investment accounts and life insurance would establish 2 scholarship funds, one for students studying history or historic preservation, another for students from families who had lost a parent. The scholarships will be awarded based on merit and need, I explained to the room. Students who demonstrate both academic achievement and genuine financial hardship. Trevor's voice was hollow. Why history and preservation? Because those are things that matter to me, I said. Because preserving the past and educating young people about their heritage seems more valuable than enabling adults who think they're entitled to inherit wealth they didn't earn. Harold had brought 2 witnesses, his assistant and her husband who lived nearby. They arrived just as he finished reading the will, and they signed the document without knowing the family drama behind it. After they left, the 4 of us sat in my living room surrounded by Christmas decorations that now felt like props in a play about a family that no longer existed. It's done, I said finally. Trevor stared at the floor. I can't believe you actually did it. I can't believe it came to this, I replied. Amanda stood up abruptly. Come on, Trevor. We're leaving. What about the boys? Trevor asked. What about Christmas? What about them? Amanda's voice was bitter. They can have Christmas with their grandmother, who chose strangers over her own family. I felt a stab of pain at the thought of Jake and Mason leaving, of missing their first Christmas morning at Grandma Io's house. But I also knew that exposing them to more of this conflict would be worse than disappointing them. Maybe that's best, I said quietly. For tonight, anyway. Trevor looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Is this really what you want, Mom? You want us to leave? I want you to do whatever feels right to you, I said. Just like I did what felt right to me. He stood up slowly, like an old man despite being only 48. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if it can be fixed, I admitted. They went upstairs to pack and explain to the boys that they needed to leave early. I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I'd spent weeks arranging, listening to the muffled sounds of disappointment and confusion from the children's room. 20 minutes later, they came downstairs with their suitcases. Jake and Mason looked confused and upset, but they'd clearly been told not to ask too many questions. Are we coming back tomorrow for Christmas? Jake asked me directly. I knelt down to his level, my heart breaking. I don't know, sweetheart. That's up to your parents. But we have presents here, Mason said, his lower lip trembling. I know you do, and they'll be here whenever you want to come get them. Amanda was already at the door, her face like stone. Trevor lingered, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Goodbye, Mom, he said finally. Goodbye, son. The door closed behind them, and I was alone in my beautiful house with its twinkling lights and perfectly decorated tree and the deafening silence of a family destroyed. I walked through each room, turning off lights and checking locks, performing the same routine I'd done every night for 8 years. But tonight everything felt different. The house felt bigger, emptier, charged with the energy of irreversible change. In the kitchen, I cleaned up the coffee cups and put away the Christmas cookies that no one had eaten. I wrapped the leftover food and stored it in the refrigerator, knowing it would probably spoil before I could finish it all myself. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about what I'd done. Had I been too harsh? Too quick to make permanent changes based on one terrible conversation? Was I destroying my family over pride and stubbornness? But then I remembered Amanda's cold calculation of my home's worth, Trevor's weak agreement with her financial pressure, the way they both made me feel like my independence was a burden they shouldn't have to bear. No, I'd made the right choice. Difficult, painful, heartbreaking, but right. I finished my tea and went upstairs to my bedroom, passing the guest rooms that should have been full of my family. Instead, they were empty and dark, monuments to expectations that would never be fulfilled. Before getting into bed, I walked to the window that overlooked the garden. In the spring, Marcus's roses would bloom again. The perennials we'd planted together would push through the soil. The oak tree where we'd hung a swing for Trevor would leaf out in bright green. The house would endure. The garden would continue its cycles. And I would tend to both of them for as long as I was able. Not because I was clinging to the past, but because I was choosing to live fully in the present I'd worked so hard to create. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, with fresh snow dusting the garden like powdered sugar on a cake. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen, watching cardinals and blue jays at the bird feeder Marcus had installed outside the window. The house felt different in the morning light. Not empty exactly, but peaceful. Settled, like it knew the storm had passed and things were going to be different now. I'd slept better than I had in months. No anxiety about family visits or financial discussions or walking on eggshells around Amanda's criticism. Just the deep, restful sleep of someone who had finally stopped pretending that keeping the peace was more important than maintaining her dignity. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. Trevor's number flashed on the caller ID, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello, son. Merry Christmas, Mom." His voice was subdued, exhausted. "Merry Christmas. I don't know what I wanted. To apologize, I guess. To see if there's any way to undo what happened last night." I set down my coffee cup and considered his question carefully. "Do you want to undo it because you think I was wrong or because you don't like the consequences?" There was a long pause. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Another pause. I think maybe we both made mistakes last night. It wasn't the acknowledgement I'd hoped for, but it was something." "What mistakes do you think you made, Trevor?" "I think we came on too strong about the house thing. I think Amanda was too blunt about the financial aspects. I think we made you feel like we didn't care about what you wanted." "And what mistakes do you think I made?" "I think you overreacted. I think you made permanent decisions based on one bad conversation. I think you chose the nuclear option when we could have worked things out." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. It was about what I'd expected. Partial acknowledgement. Deflection of responsibility. Focus on my reaction, rather than the behavior that prompted it. "Trevor," I said gently, "do you think I have the right to live in my own home for as long as I choose?" "Of course you do, Mom. Do you think I have the right to spend my own money on things that make me happy, even if that means there's less left for inheritance?" A longer pause. "I think you should be practical about the future. That's not what I asked. I think you have the right to make your own choices," he said finally. "But I also think you should consider how those choices affect your family. And if my choice is to stay in this house and spend my money on maintaining it and enjoying it, instead of saving it for your inheritance, would you and Amanda support that choice?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Trevor? I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know." And there it was. The truth we'd been dancing around for months, maybe years. He didn't know if he could support my independence, if it cost him financially. "Thank you for being honest," I said. "Does that mean you won't change the will back?" "It means I understand why I needed to change it in the first place." We talked for a few more minutes about practical things, when they'd be back in Portland, whether I needed anything from the store, whether the boys could call me later. Polite, distant conversation between people who were still figuring out how to relate to each other after everything had changed. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about the future. Not the immediate future of legal documents and hurt feelings, but the long-term future of what my life would look like now. I was 73 years old, in good health, with enough money to live comfortably for many years. I had a house I loved, gardens that needed tending, and a community I'd been part of for 4 decades. I had friends, interests, volunteer opportunities, and the freedom to make my own choices without worrying about their impact on someone else's financial expectations. For the first time in years, that future looked appealing, rather than daunting. The doorbell rang around noon, and I was surprised to see my neighbor Carol standing on the porch with a covered dish. "I saw Trevor's car leave early this morning," she said. "I thought you might like some company for Christmas lunch." Carol was 75, a widow like me, and we'd become good friends since Marcus died. She was one of the few people who understood the challenges of maintaining independence while aging gracefully. "That's very thoughtful," I said, inviting her in. "I'd love the company." We heated up her famous green bean casserole and some of the ham I'd prepared for a family dinner that never happened. We ate in the dining room, surrounded by Christmas decorations, and talked about everything except why my family had left early. "How are you doing, really?" Carol asked over dessert. I told her everything. The whole ugly conversation, the changes to my will, the way Christmas morning felt both lonely and liberating. "Good for you," she said when I finished. "I've been watching Amanda size up this house for 3 years. That woman's been planning this conversation since the day she married Trevor. You think I did the right thing?" "I think you did the only thing you could do and still live with yourself," Carol said. "Family that treats you like a bank account isn't really family, Io. It's just people who happen to share your DNA." After she left, I spent the afternoon reading in the living room, enjoying the peaceful silence and the way the winter light filtered through the tall windows. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, its presents still wrapped underneath. Jake and Mason's gifts, Trevor and Amanda's gifts, tokens of love and tradition that now felt like artifacts from another life. Around 4 o'clock, the phone rang again. This time it was Amanda. "Iona? It's me." "Hello, Amanda. I wanted to talk to you about last night, woman to woman, without Trevor listening." I was curious despite myself. "All right. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I think maybe I came across as more harsh than I intended." "I see. The thing is, I really do care about your welfare. I worry about you being alone in that big house. And yes, I also think about our family's future. I don't think those two things have to be mutually exclusive." It was a more diplomatic approach than she'd taken the night before, but I could hear the calculation underneath it. She was trying a different strategy to get the same result. "What exactly are you proposing, Amanda?" "I'm proposing that we find a middle ground. Maybe you don't have to sell the house right away. Maybe we could look into options for you to have more help, more support, while still maintaining your independence. And in exchange? In exchange, maybe you could reconsider the changes to your will. Maybe we could find a way to preserve your legacy while still providing for your family." There it was. The real agenda hadn't changed, just the packaging. "Amanda," I said carefully, "do you believe I have the right to live in my home and spend my money as I choose, even if that means leaving less for inheritance? I believe you have the right to make informed decisions about your future. That's not what I asked. I believe families should support each other. I believe people who love each other should consider each other's needs and circumstances. And if my need is to maintain my independence and my circumstance is that I love my home and want to stay in it, then I think we should talk about ways to make that work for everyone. Everyone meaning you and Trevor get some guarantee of future inheritance." A pause. "I think it's reasonable for your son to expect some consideration of his family's future when you make decisions about your estate." And there it was again. The fundamental disagreement that couldn't be bridged with prettier words or diplomatic language. Amanda believed my assets belonged partly to her family already. I believed they belonged to me until I chose to give them away. "Amanda," I said, "I appreciate the call, but my decision stands. If you and Trevor want a relationship with me based on love and respect rather than financial expectations, I'm open to that. But the will isn't changing. You're making a mistake, Iona. You're gonna end up alone. Maybe, I said. But I'll end up alone with my dignity intact. She hung up without saying goodbye. I made dinner for myself that evening, lighting candles and using the good china because there was no reason not to. I opened a bottle of wine Marcus and I had been saving for a special occasion, figuring that choosing myself over other people's expectations qualified as special enough. As I ate, I thought about the conversation with Amanda and what it revealed about the fundamental divide between us. She saw my independence as selfishness, my desire to control my own life as inconsideration for others. I saw her expectations of inheritance as entitlement, her pressure for me to change my life as manipulation. Neither of us was entirely wrong, and neither of us was entirely right. But we were incompatible in ways that couldn't be fixed with compromise or better communication. After dinner, I called Harold to make sure the will changes were properly filed and to discuss additional legal protections. If Amanda was going to escalate this conflict, I wanted to be prepared. The documents are all in order, he assured me, but I have to ask. Are you prepared for the possibility that this decision might permanently damage your relationship with your son? I'm prepared for the possibility that the relationship was already damaged, I said. That maybe it has been for years, and I just didn't want to see it. And you're comfortable with that? I thought about Jake and Mason, about missing their childhood, about growing old without family holidays or grandchildren's visits. It wasn't comfortable, it was heartbreaking. I'm more comfortable with it than I am with pretending that financial coercion is love, I said finally. All right then. The will is finalized. Your wishes will be carried out exactly as you specified. After I hung up, I walked through the house one more time, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure. In each room, I paused to appreciate something Marcus and I had chosen together. The grandfather clock in the hallway that chimed the hours with Westminster melody. The built-in bookshelves in the library, filled with volumes we'd collected over decades. The window seat in the master bedroom where I'd read while he worked, on his stamp collection. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was the physical manifestation of a life well lived, a marriage well tended, dreams carefully cultivated and brought to fruition. No amount of money could replace what I would lose if I gave it up. In my bedroom, I pulled out a photo album from the nightstand drawer. Pictures of Trevor as a baby, as a toddler learning to walk in the garden, as a boy building snowmen on the front lawn. Pictures of his high school graduation, his college acceptance letter, his wedding day when he'd looked so happy and hopeful. I studied his face in those photos, looking for signs of the man who would someday ask me to sell my home to subsidize his lifestyle. Had that capacity for entitlement always been there, hidden beneath the surface? Or had it developed gradually, nurtured by a culture that taught people to expect inheritance rather than earn their own way? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the how and why were less important than the what now. What now was that my son saw my independence as an inconvenience and my assets as his future security. What now was that I'd chosen to prioritize my own dignity over his financial expectations. What now was that I was 73 years old, alone in a house full of memories, with a future that looked uncertain but authentically mine. I closed the photo album and got ready for bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to defend or doubt the choice I'd made. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not someone's inconvenient mother or disappointing grandmother or stubborn obstacle to financial gain. Just Iona Fleming, 73 years old, owner of a beautiful house and a life shaped by her own choices. It was a start. 3 weeks passed before Trevor called again. 3 weeks of unusual peace in my Millbrook home. 3 weeks of settling into a routine that felt both foreign and liberating. I woke each morning without the weight of family expectations pressing down on me. Went to bed each night without rehearsing conversations about my choices, or defending my right to live as I pleased. The house felt different now, more purely mine than it had in years. I rearranged furniture that Marcus and I had positioned decades ago, not because I disliked the old arrangement, but because I could. I hung new artwork in the hallway, painted the guest bathroom a bold sage green that Amanda would have criticized, and bought myself fresh flowers every few days just because they made me smile. Carol stopped by frequently, sometimes with meals, sometimes just for coffee and conversation. Other neighbors began reaching out too, people I'd known for years but had somehow drifted away from during the complicated dance of trying to accommodate Trevor and Amanda's visits and opinions. "You seem lighter," Dr. Patricia Morris observed during my monthly checkup. She'd been my physician since Marcus died, a woman in her 60s who understood the particular challenges of aging as an independent woman. "I feel lighter," I admitted, sitting on the examining table in her office. "I made some difficult family decisions over Christmas, and I think they were the right ones." "Want to talk about it?" I told her everything, the whole messy story of Christmas Eve and the will change and the aftermath. She listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions that helped me process what had happened. "How do you feel about the possibility that this estrangement might be permanent?" she asked when I finished. "Sad," I said honestly, "but not regretful. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense. Grief and regret are different emotions entirely. You can mourn the loss of a relationship while still knowing you made the right choice. That's exactly how I feel. I miss Trevor, I miss the boys terribly. But I don't miss feeling like I had to justify every decision to people who saw me as an obstacle to their financial goals." Dr. Morris made notes in my chart. "Your blood pressure is excellent, by the way, better than it's been in months. Sometimes removing chronic stress has immediate physical benefits." I thought about that as I drove home through the snowy streets of Millbrook. Had I been carrying that much tension without realizing it? Had the constant low-level conflict with Amanda, the walking on eggshells, the feeling that my choices were always being scrutinized and judged, been affecting my health? At home, I found a certified letter waiting from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, wondering if Trevor and Amanda had decided to challenge the will or pursue some other legal action. Instead, it was a letter from an attorney representing the Millbrook Historical Society, thanking me for my generous bequest and requesting a meeting to discuss the details of the house preservation plan. Of course, Harold must have contacted them as part of finalizing the will changes. The reality of what I'd done hit me again, the permanence of it. The way my decision would outlive me and shape this house's future long after I was gone. I called the number in the letter and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Margaret Hutchins, the Historical Society's director, sounded genuinely excited about the prospect of preserving the Fleming house. "It's one of the finest examples of Victorian architecture in the county," she said. "We've always hoped it would someday become available for preservation." After hanging up, I walked through the house trying to see it through the eyes of future visitors. The oak staircase with its hand-carved newel post, the original hardwood floors that Marcus and I had meticulously maintained, the period light fixtures we'd hunted for in antique shops across New England. This house would become a museum of sorts, a place where people could experience how families lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It felt right. Better than letting it be sold and subdivided or demolished for a modern development. Better than watching strangers strip away the details that made it special. My home would endure, would continue to welcome people and tell stories, just different stories than the ones Marcus and I had created here. That evening, as I sat in the library with a book and a glass of wine, the phone rang. Trevor's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that had become associated with his calls. "Hello, son." "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "I'm well. And you?" "We're managing. The boys ask about you every day. Jake wants to know if you're still mad at them." The words hit like a physical blow. Of course the children would think this was about them, would blame themselves for their parents' choices and my reaction. "Tell Jake that I'm not mad at him or Mason," I said firmly. "Tell them that Grandma Io loves them very much, and that sometimes adults have disagreements that have nothing to do with children. They miss you, Mom. We all do." "I miss you too." There was a long pause, filled with all the things we weren't saying to each other. "Amanda thinks we should try family counseling," Trevor said finally. She found someone who specializes in estate planning conflicts and family dynamics. I almost laughed at the clinical terminology, estate planning conflicts, as if reducing our relationship to a financial dispute would somehow make it easier to resolve. What do you think about counseling, Trevor? I think maybe it's worth trying, if you're willing. I considered the suggestion carefully. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grasp at any possibility of repairing our relationship, but another part of me wondered what exactly we would be trying to repair, and whether the fundamental differences between us could be counseled away. What would be the goal of counseling? I asked. To find a way to move forward as a family, to figure out how to respect each other's perspectives and needs. And would changing my will back be part of moving forward? The pause told me everything I needed to know. Trevor, I think that would have to be part of the discussion. I mean, if we're really going to rebuild trust and move forward together, then yeah, I think the will issue would need to be addressed. There it was, the condition hidden beneath the olive branch. We could go to counseling, we could work on our relationship, but only if I was willing to reconsider giving them the inheritance they'd expected. So the goal of counseling would be to convince me to change my will back. The goal would be to find a solution that works for everyone. And if the solution I've already chosen doesn't work for you and Amanda, then we'd work together to find something that does. I walked to the kitchen window while we talked, looking out at the garden where the first crocuses were beginning to push through the snow. Spring was coming, renewal and new growth, the eternal promise that life continued regardless of human disappointments. Trevor, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think counseling will help us. Why not? Mom, we're family, we should be able to work this out. Because the problem isn't communication or understanding. The problem is fundamental disagreement about my right to make decisions about my own life and assets. That's not fair. We're not trying to control your life, aren't you? You want me to sell my house. You want me to change my will to benefit you financially. You want me to make decisions based on your needs rather than my own preferences. How is that not controlling my life? Because we're thinking about practical realities, about what's best for everyone in the long term. What's best for everyone, or what's best for you and Amanda? Those aren't mutually exclusive, Mom. They are when your version of what's best for me requires me to give up everything I love. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circling around the same fundamental impasse. Trevor couldn't understand why I wouldn't prioritize his family's financial security over my own independence. I couldn't understand why he thought his financial needs should dictate my life choices. We hung up with tentative plans for him to bring the boys for a visit the following weekend, but I could hear the reservation in his voice. He was trying to maintain some kind of relationship with me, but his heart wasn't in it. Not as long as the will remained unchanged. After the call, I sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about the nature of family loyalty. Was I being disloyal by refusing to prioritize Trevor's wishes over my own? Was he being disloyal by making our relationship conditional on my financial compliance? The questions had no easy answers, but I was beginning to understand that maybe easy answers weren't the point. Maybe the point was figuring out what kind of person I wanted to be in the time I had left, regardless of how others reacted to those choices. The meeting with Margaret Hutchins the following week was a welcome distraction from family drama. She arrived at my house with an architect and a preservation specialist, and we spent 3 hours walking through every room while they took notes and photographs. The original crown molding is in remarkable condition, the architect observed, running his hand along the dining room ceiling. And these pocket doors are functional? Completely functional, I said, demonstrating how the doors between the dining room and living room could slide into the walls. Marcus and I had them restored about 15 years ago. Margaret was particularly fascinated by the butler's pantry and the original dumbwaiter that connected the kitchen to the second-floor laundry room. Features like these give visitors such a clear sense of how households operated in this era, she said. The social dynamics, the servant relationships, the way domestic work was organized. We discussed timelines and logistics. The plan was for me to remain in the house for as long as I was able, with the Historical Society gradually taking over maintenance responsibilities and beginning to plan for the eventual conversion to a museum. We'd love to incorporate your family's story into the exhibits, Margaret said as we concluded the meeting. The Fleming family's 45 years here represent such a significant portion of the house's history. I thought about that after they left. My family's story. The story of Marcus and me as young marrieds, painting rooms and planting gardens, and dreaming about the future. The story of Trevor's childhood, birthday parties and homework sessions, and bedtime stories. The story of holidays and celebrations and ordinary evenings that had seemed unremarkable at the time but now felt precious beyond measure. Would that story include the recent estrangement? Would future museum visitors learn about the Christmas when a family fell apart over money and expectations? Probably not. Museum exhibits tended to focus on the positive, the aspirational, the stories that reflected well on human nature. But it was part of the house's history too. The story of how love could be corrupted by financial pressure, how family bonds could fracture under the weight of unexamined expectations. Maybe there was value in acknowledging that part of the story as well. Trevor brought the boys the following Saturday, but Amanda stayed home. The visit was stilted and careful, with too much emphasis on politeness and not enough on genuine connection. Jake and Mason were excited to see me, but they seemed confused by the tension between their father and me. They kept looking back and forth between us, as if trying to decode what was wrong. "Grandma Io, why did we have to leave early at Christmas?" Mason asked while we were making cookies in the kitchen. Trevor started to answer, but I held up my hand. "Sometimes adults have disagreements about important things," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean anyone is bad or wrong, just that we see things differently." "Are you and Daddy still disagreeing?" Jake asked. I looked at Trevor, who was staring at the floor. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." "About what?" "About what's going to happen to this house when Grandma Io gets older," Trevor said before I could answer. It wasn't entirely accurate, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. I decided not to correct him in front of the children. "Will you still live here?" Mason asked me. "Yes, I will. For as long as I can." "Good," Jake said with 8-year-old certainty. "This is the best house ever." After lunch, Trevor and I sat in the living room while the boys played upstairs. The conversation was awkward, full of false starts and careful avoidance of controversial topics. "They really do miss you," Trevor said finally. "I miss them too, more than I can express." "Then why won't you consider counseling? Why won't you give us a chance to work this out?" I studied his face, looking for genuine openness to compromise rather than just another strategy to get what he wanted. "What would working it out look like to you, Trevor? Specifically?" "I don't know. Maybe you could keep the house but set up some kind of trust for the boys, education. Maybe we could find a way to ensure your care as you age without putting the financial burden entirely on us. And if I said I'm planning to donate everything to charity, including money that could fund the boys, education, what would you say?" His jaw tightened. "I'd say that seems unfair to your family." "And if I said that I believe it's more important to help disadvantaged children get an education than to provide additional advantages to children who are already privileged, I'd say those disadvantaged children aren't your grandchildren." "And there's the crux of it," I said softly. "You believe family comes first, regardless of merit or need. I believe responsibility comes first, regardless of relationship. Family should come first, Mom. That's what family means." "Does it? Or does family mean loving people without expecting them to sacrifice their values to benefit you?" We stared at each other across the coffee table, two people who loved each other but couldn't bridge the fundamental difference in how we saw the world. "I don't know how to fix this," Trevor said finally. "Maybe it can't be fixed. Maybe we just have to figure out how to love each other in spite of disagreeing about something important. Can you love me if I think you're making the wrong choice? Yes. Can you love me if I refuse to make the choice you want?" He was quiet for a long time. Upstairs, I could hear the boys playing with the train set Marcus had built in the guest room, their voices bright with uncomplicated joy. "I'm trying," Trevor said finally. "That's all any of us can do." They left before dinner, with promises from the boys to call me during the week and vague plans for another visit soon. Trevor hugged me goodbye, but it felt dutiful rather than affectionate. As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, I wondered if this was how our relationship would be from now on. Careful visits focused on the grandchildren, surface-level conversations that avoided any topic that might lead to conflict, love expressed through politeness rather than genuine intimacy. It wasn't what I'd wanted, but it was better than the alternative of constant pressure and resentment. At least the boys would know their grandmother loved them, even if they didn't understand why the adults in their lives couldn't seem to agree about important things. Spring arrived early that year, with daffodils blooming in March and the maple trees budding before the last snow had melted. I threw myself into garden work with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years, clearing beds and planning new plantings, and consulting with the landscaper about long-term maintenance strategies. The physical work felt good, therapeutic in a way that sitting inside brooding about family problems couldn't match. My hands in the soil, the smell of earth and growing things, the satisfaction of watching dormant plants come back to life, all reminded me that there was beauty and purpose in the world beyond human relationships and their complications. Carol often joined me in the garden, her own yard sharing the back fence with mine. We worked companionably, talking about plants and weather and neighborhood news, occasionally delving into deeper topics, but mostly just enjoying the peaceful rhythm of outdoor work. "You're different since Christmas," she observed one afternoon, as we divided hostas behind the garden shed. "How so?" "More settled. More like yourself, if that makes sense." It did make sense. I felt more like myself too, more connected to the person I'd been before becoming so focused on managing other people's expectations and reactions. I think I'd been trying so hard to be the kind of mother and grandmother everyone wanted that I'd forgotten how to be the kind of person I respected, I said. It's easy to lose yourself in family dynamics, especially when you're trying to keep everyone happy. The irony is that trying to keep everyone happy made everyone miserable, including me. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on our backs. Then Carol asked the question I'd been dreading but knew was inevitable. "Do you think Trevor will ever accept what you've done?" I sat back on my heels, considering. I think Trevor might eventually understand it. Whether he'll accept it is a different question. And if he doesn't? Then I'll be sad, but I won't regret my choice. Even if it means missing the boys growing up? That was the hard part, the price that made my decision truly costly. Missing Jake and Mason's childhood, not being the grandmother I'd planned to be. Watching them grow up from a distance rather than being intimately involved in their lives. Even then, I said, though my voice caught slightly. Because the alternative was teaching them that love comes with financial strings attached, that family members should sacrifice their independence to benefit others, that being old means losing the right to make your own choices. Carol nodded thoughtfully. Those would be terrible lessons. Yes, they would. We finished dividing the hostas and moved on to pruning the rose bushes, a job that required careful attention to avoid damaging the new growth while removing the dead wood from winter. It seemed like an apt metaphor for what I was trying to do with my own life. Preserving what was healthy and vital, while cutting away what had become diseased or stunted. That evening, I had dinner with my neighbors Ruth and David Crenshaw, a couple in their 80s who'd been married for 57 years. We'd become closer since Marcus died, bonding over the shared experience of navigating life changes and aging with grace. "How are things with Trevor?" Ruth asked over dessert. She was one of the few people who knew the full story of what had happened at Christmas. "Complicated," I said. "He's trying to maintain a relationship, but he's still hoping I'll change my mind about the will." "And you won't? I won't." David leaned back in his chair, studying me with the sharp intelligence that had made him a successful businessman before retirement. "You know, I've seen a lot of families torn apart by money over the years. The ones that survive are the ones where the older generation sets clear boundaries and sticks to them. Even if it hurts? Especially if it hurts. Because if you give in to pressure once, it never stops. There's always another crisis, another need, another reason why you should sacrifice your autonomy for their benefit." Ruth nodded agreement. "We went through something similar with David's sister when our parents died. She expected us to sell the family farm to give her cash for her share of the inheritance. We refused, took over the farm ourselves, and she didn't speak to us for 5 years. What happened after 5 years? She realized she'd been wrong, David said. Not about wanting the money, but about thinking she had the right to dictate how we managed our inheritance. We eventually reconciled, but only after she accepted that we were going to make our own decisions. Do you think Trevor will come to that realization? Maybe. Depends on whether he values his relationship with you more than his financial expectations. And if he doesn't? Ruth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then you'll know you made the right choice. Family isn't about blood, Iona. It's about love and respect and mutual support. People who only want a relationship with you because of what you can give them aren't really family, no matter what their DNA says. I thought about that conversation as I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook. Was I expecting too much of Trevor? Was I being unfair to judge him harshly for wanting financial security for his family? Or was I simply holding him to the same standard I held myself? That love shouldn't be conditional on material benefit. The questions felt important, but unanswerable, at least not with certainty. All I could do was continue making choices that aligned with my values, and hope that someday Trevor would understand why those choices had been necessary. At home, I found a message on my answering machine from Harold, asking me to call him about some additional legal documents related to the Historical Society bequest. I made a note to call him in the morning and went upstairs to get ready for bed. In the master bedroom, I paused at the window that overlooked the garden. Even in the darkness, I could make out the shapes of the plants Marcus and I had chosen together, the pathways we'd designed, the small pond where we'd sat on summer evenings, watching the goldfish swim in lazy circles. This was my legacy, I realized. Not the money or the investments or the house itself, but the life I'd lived here, the choices I'd made, the way I'd responded to challenges and disappointments and joys. Whatever happened with Trevor, whatever the future held, I would face it as myself, rather than as someone else's version of who I should be. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it felt enormous to me. For the first time in years, I was living authentically, making decisions based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. The cost had been high, but the reward was invaluable. The return of my own sense of self, the reclamation of my right to shape my own life according to my own vision of what mattered. Outside, an owl called from the oak tree, its voice echoing across the garden and into the night. I listened until the sound faded, then drew the curtains and prepared for sleep, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, I would meet it as fully myself. 6 months later, the phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was deadheading the roses in my front garden. I almost didn't answer, my hands dirty from the soil and my mind focused on the satisfying rhythm of snipping spent blooms to encourage new growth. But something made me wipe my hands on my gardening apron and hurry inside to catch it before it went to voicemail. Mrs. Fleming, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling about your son, Trevor Fleming. My heart stopped. Every terrible possibility flashed through my mind in the space of a single heartbeat. Car accident. Heart attack. Some random violence that had stolen my son from the world before we could repair what had been broken between us. Is he all right? The words came out as a whisper. He's physically fine, ma'am, but I need to ask you some questions about your family's financial situation and some recent legal documents. Financial situation. Legal documents. Not an accident then, but something else entirely. Something that made my stomach clench with a different kind of dread. I don't understand, Detective. Ma'am, your son and daughter-in-law have been arrested on charges of identity theft and fraud. We have evidence that they've been using your social security number and financial information to open credit accounts and take out loans without your knowledge. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Identity theft. Fraud. Trevor and Amanda had been stealing from me. How much? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. We're still investigating the full extent, but preliminary estimates suggest over $200,000 in fraudulent accounts and unauthorized transactions. $200,000. I thought about Amanda's designer handbags, Trevor's expensive car, the private school tuition for Jake and Mason that they'd mentioned during one of our strained phone conversations. Had it all been funded by money stolen from me? Mrs. Fleming, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Detective, I had no idea. I check my bank statements regularly, and I haven't seen any unusual activity. They were careful to use your information for accounts that wouldn't show up on your existing statements. Credit cards sent to different addresses, loans processed through online lenders, that sort of thing. We only discovered it because one of the lenders ran a more thorough background check and noticed discrepancies. I felt nauseous. While I'd been agonizing over whether I'd been too harsh in changing my will, Trevor and Amanda had been systematically stealing from me. While I'd been wondering if family counseling might help us reconcile, they'd been using my identity to fund their lifestyle. What happens now? I asked. We'll need you to come in and give a statement. We'll also need you to review the fraudulent accounts and confirm that you didn't authorize any of the activity. The district attorney will likely want to discuss prosecution options with you. Prosecution. Criminal charges against my own son. The word felt surreal, like something that happened to other families, not to people like us. Detective, what about the children? Jake and Mason? Child Protective Services is involved. The boys are currently with Mrs. Fleming's sister, while we sort out the legal situation. I closed my eyes, thinking about my grandsons suddenly thrust into a world of police investigations and family scandal, trying to understand why their parents had been taken away. Mrs. Fleming, can you come in this afternoon to give your statement? Yes, of course. Whatever you need. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing and trying to process what I'd learned. The betrayal felt deeper than anything Amanda had said at Christmas, deeper than Trevor's weak capitulation to her demands. This wasn't just disagreement about my choices or expectations about inheritance. This was criminal violation of my trust, systematic exploitation of my identity for their financial gain. Had this been going on while they were pressuring me to sell the house? Had they been stealing from me while simultaneously arguing that I was being selfish with my money? The irony was so bitter it made my throat burn. I called Harold first, then Carol, then Dr. Morris to cancel my afternoon appointment. Each conversation required me to explain what had happened, to say the words out loud that made it real. My son had been arrested for stealing from me. The drive to Portland felt endless, even though it was only 90 minutes from Millbrook. I kept thinking about Trevor as a child, about the values Marcus and I had tried to instill in him. Honesty, hard work, integrity, respect for others. Where had we gone wrong? How had the boy who used to confess to breaking windows and lying about homework grown into a man who could steal his mother's identity without apparent remorse? The police station was a maze of beige hallways and fluorescent lights. Detective Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. I know this is difficult, Mrs. Fleming. Family financial crimes are always complicated, emotionally. She walked me through stacks of documents, account applications with my forged signature, loan agreements in my name, credit card statements showing purchases I'd never made. The scope of it was staggering. Trevor and Amanda had been stealing from me for over 2 years, carefully managing the fraud to avoid detection while maintaining the appearance of financial struggle. They were quite sophisticated about it, Detective Martinez explained. Different addresses for account statements, graduated increases in credit limits, payments made to keep accounts in good standing. This wasn't impulsive or desperate behavior. This was planned and executed over an extended period. What kind of things were they buying? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She showed me statements highlighting specific purchases. Private school tuition, luxury vacations, home improvements. A boat that I'd never heard them mention. Jewelry, electronics, restaurant bills that exceeded my monthly grocery budget. They were living well above their legitimate income, Detective Martinez said. Your son makes decent money as an accountant, but not enough to support this lifestyle. I thought about Amanda's comments at Christmas about their family struggling financially, about needing help with the boys, education and activities. Meanwhile, they'd been funding private school and luxury purchases with money stolen from me. Mrs. Fleming, I need to ask about your relationship with your son and daughter-in-law. Had there been any family conflicts or financial disputes recently? I told her about Christmas, about the pressure to sell my house, about changing my will. As I spoke, I saw the pieces clicking together in her mind. So they knew they were no longer beneficiaries of your estate? Yes. I told them in December. And the fraudulent activity increased significantly after that date. Some of the largest transactions occurred in January and February. The timeline made my stomach turn. After learning they wouldn't inherit my estate, Trevor and Amanda had escalated their theft, taking as much as they could while they still had access to my personal information. "What do you want to do about prosecution?" Detective Martinez asked gently. It was the question I'd been dreading since the phone call that morning. Did I want to press charges against my own son? Did I want to be responsible for sending Trevor to prison, for making Jake and Mason's situation even more traumatic? What are my options? Full prosecution for identity theft and fraud. The amounts involved make this a felony case. Your son could face significant prison time, or you could choose not to press charges, though the district attorney might still proceed if they believe it's in the public interest. And if I don't press charges, quote, the criminal case would likely be dropped, but you'd still need to deal with the financial aftermath, disputing the fraudulent accounts, working with creditors, potentially filing civil suits to recover damages. I stared at the stack of documents, evidence of my son's betrayal laid out in black and white, 2 years of systematic theft, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all while he was lecturing me about being responsible with money and thinking about family. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course. But Mrs. Fleming, I should tell you that this kind of family financial crime often escalates if there aren't consequences. People who are willing to steal from elderly relatives rarely stop on their own. The drive home was a blur of tears and anger and confusion. I kept thinking about Jake and Mason, about how this would affect them, about whether protecting them from the consequences of their parents' actions would actually protect them at all. At home, I called Harold and explained everything. His reaction was swift and clear. Prosecute them, Io. Fully and completely. Harold, they're my family. No, they're thieves who happen to share your DNA. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't systematically defraud elderly relatives while pretending to care about their welfare. But the boys need to learn that actions have consequences. They need to understand that what their parents did was wrong, not something to be covered up or excused because of family relationships. I knew he was right, but knowing didn't make the decision easier. That evening I called Carol and asked her to come over. I needed someone to talk through the implications, someone who would be honest about what I should do. They stole from you while lecturing you about being selfish, she said after I'd explained everything. They pressured you to give them inheritance money while secretly taking whatever they wanted anyway. This isn't a family dispute, Io. This is criminal behavior. But if I press charges, Trevor could go to prison. The boys could end up in foster care. And if you don't press charges, you're teaching everyone involved that stealing from family is acceptable, as long as you're related to your victim. We talked until nearly midnight, weighing options and consequences, trying to find a path that would serve justice while minimizing harm to the children. Finally, Carol asked the question that clarified everything for me. If this had been strangers who stole your identity and defrauded you out of $200,000, would you press charges? Of course. Then why should blood relationship change that? She was right. Family relationship didn't excuse criminal behavior. If anything, it made the betrayal worse, not more forgivable. The next morning, I called Detective Martinez and told her I wanted to proceed with full prosecution. The decision felt both terrible and necessary, like amputating a gangrenous limb to save the rest of the body. I think you're making the right choice, Mrs. Fleming. I know it's difficult. Detective, what happens to the children during all this? That depends on several factors. Extended family placement is usually preferred if possible. Do you know if there are other relatives who might take them? Amanda's sister, who was currently caring for the boys, came to mind. But I wondered if she understood the full scope of what Trevor and Amanda had done, or if she saw this as a family misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. 3 days later, Amanda's sister Lisa called me. Her voice was cold, accusatory, nothing like the polite friendliness she'd shown during family gatherings. How could you do this to your own son, Iona? How could you destroy your family over money? The accusation hit like a slap. After everything Trevor and Amanda had done, I was being blamed for their consequences. Lisa, they stole from me. For 2 years, while telling me I was being selfish for not giving them money voluntarily. They were desperate. They made mistakes. But calling the police? Pressing charges? That's vindictive. It's holding them accountable for criminal behavior. It's destroying those children's lives. Jake and Mason are traumatized. They don't understand why their parents are gone or why their grandmother won't help them. The guilt hit hard. My grandsons, innocent victims of their parents' choices and my response to those choices, caught in the middle of adult failures and consequences. Are they all right? Are they asking about me? They're confused and scared. They want to come home. They want their family back together. I want that too, but not at the cost of pretending that what their parents did was acceptable. So you'd rather see Trevor in prison than admit you overreacted? I'd rather see justice done than enable criminal behavior. The conversation ended badly, with Lisa hanging up on me and my heart breaking for children who didn't deserve any of this pain. But I knew that backing down now wouldn't actually help Jake and Mason in the long run. It would teach them that family loyalty meant accepting abuse, that love meant tolerating betrayal, that being old and vulnerable meant having no right to justice. The legal process moved forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Trevor and Amanda were arraigned, bail was set, plea negotiations began. Through it all, I felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold, some tragedy happening to strangers rather than my own family. Harold handled most of the communication with attorneys and prosecutors, sparing me the worst of the details while keeping me informed of major developments. The financial recovery process was complicated, involving disputes with multiple creditors and institutions. But slowly the fraudulent accounts were being closed and charges reversed. "You'll recover most of the money eventually," Harold assured me, "but it's going to take time and paperwork." "I don't care about the money anymore," I said honestly. "I just want this to be over." "It will be. And you should know that the prosecutor is impressed with your willingness to pursue charges. Apparently, a lot of elderly fraud victims choose not to prosecute family members, which makes it harder to deter this kind of crime." 2 months after the arrests, Trevor's attorney called to request a meeting. Trevor wanted to see me, to talk about a possible plea agreement that would involve restitution and probation rather than prison time. I almost said no. The idea of facing my son, of seeing him in the context of criminal proceedings and plea bargains, felt unbearable. But curiosity won out, along with the persistent hope that maybe he would finally understand what he'd done and why it was wrong. We met at Harold's office, neutral territory that felt safer than my home, or anywhere with emotional associations. Trevor looked older, thinner, worn down by months of legal stress and public shame. He couldn't meet my eyes when I walked into the conference room. "Hello, Mom." "Hello, Trevor." His attorney, a young woman with efficient mannerisms and no patience for family drama, outlined the proposed plea agreement. Trevor would plead guilty to felony fraud, pay full restitution, serve 5 years probation, and perform community service. Amanda would face similar terms. In exchange, she said, the prosecution would recommend against prison time and the case would be resolved without a trial. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and trusted, who had systematically stolen from me while convincing me I was the one being unreasonable about money. "Do you have anything to say to me, Trevor?" He finally looked up, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry that you got caught, or sorry that you did it. Sorry that I did it. Sorry that I hurt you. Sorry that I let Amanda convince me it was justified because we needed the money and you weren't using it anyway." The explanation stung, even as it provided clarity. They'd convinced themselves that stealing from me was acceptable because they needed money I wasn't using. As if my money sitting in accounts, rather than being spent on their priorities, made it fair game for theft. "Trevor, you spent 2 years stealing from me while lecturing me about being responsible with money. You pressured me to sell my house while secretly funding your lifestyle with stolen money. How is any of that justified?" "It's not." His voice was barely a whisper. "I know it's not. I was angry about the will and scared about our finances, and Amanda kept saying that you owed us help, that it wasn't really stealing because we were family and you should have been supporting us anyway. There it was, the twisted logic that had enabled years of systematic theft. Because I hadn't voluntarily given them money, they'd felt entitled to take it without permission. Do you understand why I changed my will in the first place? Because we asked you to sell the house. Because you made me feel like my independence was a burden and my desire to live in my own home was selfish. Because you made it clear that you saw me as an obstacle to your financial security, rather than a person deserving of respect. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I understand that now, but Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right. You can start by accepting the consequences of your choices without asking me to minimize them. You mean the plea agreement? I mean taking responsibility for what you did without expecting me to protect you from the results. Trevor's attorney shifted impatiently. Mrs. Fleming, do you support the proposed plea agreement or not? I looked at my son one more time, searching for some sign of the man I'd hoped he would become rather than the one he'd turned out to be. I support justice, I said finally. If the prosecutor thinks this plea agreement serves justice, then I won't object to it. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following month. I didn't attend, couldn't bear to watch my son admit guilt in open court while cameras recorded the proceedings for the local news. Instead, I spent the day working in my garden, hands deep in soil that felt honest and real, in ways that human relationships apparently could not. Harold called that evening to tell me it was done. Trevor and Amanda had entered guilty pleas, been sentenced according to the agreement, and the criminal case was closed. They would pay restitution over the next 5 years, report regularly to probation officers, and perform community service. How do you feel? He asked. Empty? I said honestly. Relieved that it's over, but empty. That autumn, I received an unexpected phone call from Amanda's sister Lisa. Her tone was different this time. Less accusatory, more subdued. Iona? I wanted to call and apologize for what I said when this all started. I didn't understand the full scope of what Trevor and Amanda had done. What changed your mind? Living with Jake and Mason for 6 months, listening to them talk about their parents, piecing together things they said about money and purchases, and trips, I knew Trevor and Amanda couldn't afford on their salaries. I see. They stole from you for years, didn't they? While making you feel guilty for not giving them more. Yes, I'm sorry, Iona, for what they did, and for how I reacted when you held them accountable. It was a small vindication, but it mattered. Someone else in the family finally understood that I hadn't been vindictive or cruel, just unwilling to enable criminal behavior. How are the boys? I asked. They're adjusting. It's been hard, but they're resilient. They ask about you sometimes. What do you tell them? I tell them that their grandmother loves them very much, and that sometimes adults make bad choices that have consequences for everyone in the family. We talked for a few more minutes about practical things. Lisa had started the process of gaining permanent custody of Jake and Mason, since Trevor and Amanda would be dealing with legal and financial obligations for years. The boys were in counseling, doing well in school, slowly adapting to their new reality. Would you like to see them? Lisa asked before we hung up. I think it might be good for all of you. I thought about it carefully. Did I want to see my grandsons again, to try to rebuild some kind of relationship despite everything that had happened? Did I want to risk my own emotional stability by reconnecting with children who might blame me for their parents' situation? Yes, I said finally. I would like that very much. The reunion happened on a Saturday in November, at a park halfway between Millbrook and Portland. Lisa brought Jake and Mason, now 9 years old and taller than I remembered. Their faces more serious, but still recognizably the children I'd loved. They were shy at first, uncertain how to relate to the grandmother who had been absent from their lives during the most traumatic period they'd ever experienced. But gradually, as we walked around the park and talked about school and friends, and their new life with Aunt Lisa, some of the old ease returned. Grandma I.O., Mason said as we sat on a bench watching ducks on the pond, why did Mom and Dad have to go away? It was the question I'd been dreading. The one that required me to explain adult failures and consequences to children who deserved better from the adults in their lives. They made some very bad choices, I said carefully. They took money that didn't belong to them, and that's against the law. Did they take money from you? Jake asked with the directness of childhood. Yes, they did. Are you mad at them? I considered the question honestly. Was I mad? Hurt, certainly. Disappointed, absolutely. But mad seemed too simple a word for the complex mix of emotions I felt toward Trevor and Amanda. I'm sad, I said finally. Sad that they made choices that hurt our family. Sad that you boys had to experience all this pain because of things adults did. Are you mad at us? Mason asked, and my heart broke at the question. Oh, sweetheart, no. I could never be mad at you. None of this was your fault, and I love you both very much. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and playing, carefully rebuilding connections that had been damaged by circumstances beyond their control. When it was time to leave, both boys hugged me tightly, and we made plans to see each other again soon. On the drive home, I thought about the strange turns my life had taken over the past year. I'd started with a family crisis about money and expectations, lost my relationship with my son over principles and boundaries, discovered criminal betrayal that had gone on for years, and somehow found my way to a new kind of relationship with my grandsons that felt more honest than what had come before. The house felt peaceful when I got home, settled into itself the way old houses do when they've weathered storms and endured changes. I walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects and remembering the journey that had brought me to this point. In the kitchen, I made tea and sat at the table where so many difficult conversations had taken place. The will I'd changed in anger and hurt would stand as written. The house would go to the Historical Society, the money to scholarships for students who needed help achieving their dreams. It felt right. More right than it would have felt to leave everything to people who had stolen from me while lecturing me about responsibility. More right than enabling adults who believed family relationship exempted them from basic honesty and integrity. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, dusting the garden with white and promising the quiet beauty of the season to come. I would spend another winter in this house, tending the fire and reading by the window and planning for spring plantings. And in the spring, Jake and Mason would visit again, and maybe we would plant something together in the garden where their grandfather and I had dreamed so many dreams. Not the family legacy I'd once imagined, but perhaps a better one. Children who learned that love meant respecting boundaries, that trust had to be earned and maintained, that integrity mattered more than financial advantage. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.